Okay, so we're about to begin the next program here.
Jason, can you hear me?
Yes, I've got you there, Brent. We're going to
Thanks.
re-add Alan because he was missing there for a moment. And there is a... Okay, so it's always something interesting here, but we're going to be talking about election security solutions, and my guests are Alan and Brent. I believe we've got Alan coming on right now. Okay, here we go. Perfect. Good. Got both of you guys, so that's lovely. And we are ready to begin. So you gentlemen are going to be speaking with us today about a topic that many people I think have heard of, but maybe don't know that much about. Open source computing is the answer to so many different problems, and you gentlemen have been researching and doing all kinds of things with open source voting to improve the security of our voting systems. Of course, there's been so much talk lately about the alleged interference of the Russians with our election. So could you guys give us a little background on exactly what it is that you do and how it's going to help improve the security of our elections? And Alan, if you could just tilt down a little bit so we could see some more of you, I think that would be helpful.
Let's see what I can do.
Yeah, there we go. That's great. So guys, introduce yourselves. Let our audience know what it is that you are all about, and just give us the overview if you could.
Sure. Brent?
Alan, please lead the way, my friend.
Okay. Well, this started back with the election mess in 2000. And I was a analyst with Sacramento County at the time, and I couldn't believe how bad our voting system was, watching this all unfold in November and December of 2000. And I happened to be in a position where, I thought I might be able to do something. I was a consultant for Sacramento County, and the elections office was right across the street. And I thought, well, I could build a voting system better than what I've seen on television, and we could make it from commodity components, have free software. It would be much less expensive, much less cumbersome, much less complicated. You make your selections on a computer screen, print out your vote, and that becomes your official ballot. So there's no hanging chads, no ambiguity in the vote. So I started talking to people in the state capitol. I mean, I was in Sacramento and had access to officials in the state, and eventually I found one that took me up on John Burton, in fact, and he suggested we have a bill that would fund open source development, and that I could partner with an academic. Henry Brady, for example, at UC Berkeley was my first academic partner, and it turned out to be a very long odyssey. Very, the problem is that there are people that want to keep the system as it is.
Right.
The incumbents kind of rule, and I talk about the protectors of the system, the POS people. I think Brent has probably run into some POS people, and they really want to keep the system as it is, and they say, don't talk to Alan Dechert, don't give him any money because he wants a different system. And a lot of people make a living on the way things are, and for people that get elected with it, they think it works okay. So
Right.
it's a very tough, I found it very difficult to break through, and I ended up starting an organization called Open Voting Consortium. We built a prototype of our open source voting system. We demonstrated that up and down the state. We had lots of good reviews. the New York Times gave us a really good write-up in 2004, and we grew from there to do more demos until I would say our downfall in a way was Barack Obama's election in 2008, because a lot of our people thought that they were afraid of the stolen election in 2000 repeating in 2004, and they were afraid of it happening again in 2008. When it didn't happen in 2008, they thought, well, it's not that urgent. So we ran into some difficulty in getting more uptake after 2008. Eventually, in the certification process, for example, we were looking at $5 million to get a system built and certified, because as the law was then, we would have to get federal certification, and it was nothing was getting through at that time, and it was very expensive. So we had to we really couldn't. We had nowhere to go until 2013, when Alex Padilla passed a law that said that the state of California is pulling out of the voluntary federal program. And so a lot of people said, well, look, there's a new possibility for getting a system built and certified, so why don't you restart Open Voting Consortium? I wanted to get election officials involved at the beginning, and so we started California Association of Voting Officials, and Cammie Foote, who was an election official in California, we made her president, and we were interested in bringing in voting officials from the very beginning. And
let me pause you for a second there, Alan. So you mentioned POS. What is that? Because that sounds like a piece of...
well, I think it's protectors of the system. I mean, but other, you could have other interpretations of that term, but they are people that, when we did proposals to get money, the people would, this is a kind of an innovative new thing, and people would try to find experts in the field that know something about it. And there were a number of people that are maybe academics, especially that have connections with the mainstream. I mean, one of our adversaries has his office in the Gates building at Stanford, so that should give you a hint right there where his loyalties
Bill
are.
Gates?
And the Bill Gates building in Stanford.
Yeah.
And Bill Gates called the open source people like communistic. There's so open source is a threat to people who have proprietary systems. They don't like people that are offering free systems that do what their proprietary systems do.
Yeah.
And they want to oppose open source any way they can. So,
let's take a step back for a moment, because some of our audience is possibly not that technical, and you've just raised a really interesting point. So in general terms, open source systems like Linux are sort of freely available software code that anyone can change, anyone can look at and review, and proponents of open source systems feel that they're the strongest because everybody can look at them. There's nothing hidden in a black box. The code is available for everybody to review. And ostensibly, if there were a problem in an open source system, whether it was a voting system or an operating system like Linux, the open source community at large could detect this problem, correct this problem, alert the rest of the community about it, and therefore systems like Linux have flourished, particularly in the area of security, right?
exactly.
And so Bill Gates with Microsoft and all of the proprietary systems, an operating system like Windows, for instance, is in direct competition, or I should say Linux is in direct competition with Windows, because if everybody's computer used an open source operating system like Linux, Microsoft would have sort of nothing to sell to anybody. So the fact that this guy is in the Gates building and that Bill Gates is fighting against what you guys are doing seems pretty significant.
Yeah, one thing I want to add to that,
Yeah.
when we say source code, I have had many meetings with officials in the state and local governments, and I went through a presentation. After about 15 minutes, the person I was talking to, a staff person for San Francisco supervisor, she said, "What's source code?"
Right.
And I thought, wow, that's pretty far out there. But I think that you have to assume that not everybody even understands
Right.
what source code is. And
It's the
worth it
recipe,
probably
right? For
to
source
say
code
something.
is to software what a recipe is to a cake. If you don't know the
Well-
ingredients, you can't make your own cake. But if someone
Yeah.
publishes the recipe, now we know the cake is not made with hydrogenated oil or high fructose corn syrup. We know it's butter, sugar, water, flour, etc.
That's one way to put it. The other aspect of that is that it's it's the instructions that programmers write, what they give to the computer in whatever language they're writing the software code in. So that code is language. It's in a it's in a high level computer language.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't guarantee, being able to see the code doesn't guarantee that it's all going to be correct, but it increases the probability of having good, clean software, because there are, what we say, many eyes on the code, whereas what we've seen with election systems in the past is that very few people ever look at the code at all.
Right.
So nobody knows, and the overall thing here is that people have a right to know how their votes counted. You should have a right to know that. And when the systems are secret, they have secret proprietary bits in them, you really don't know how your vote is being processed or handled. Either if the vote's recorded correctly or it's being counted correctly.
Right. So give us an idea right now, because I think when I voted last, it was some sort of mechanical thing. I'm here in New York City. This is, the biggest city in the country, one of the biggest cities in the world. I would expect the voting system would be high tech. I've always wondered this. If I go to the bank, the ATM machine, that's all digital. They seem to be able to keep track of everybody's money. Why are the voting systems not digital? And if they are going to be digital, give us a little bit more insight as to why an open source system. We don't want somebody like Diebold controlling all the machines, particularly if they're owned by George Soros or something like that, right?
Right. One of the things that's made it complicated is that there's part of the kind of the religion of voting with the election officials is that your vote has to be secret, but also you can't be able to have proof that how you voted. In other words, like if you mentioned ATMs, and so when you make a deposit or a withdrawal from your ATM, you have an immediate record of it, and you can go on your computer and verify that it was recorded correctly and processed correctly. But there is has been an opposition to that based on some very old experiences with voter intimidation, coercion, and things like that. But today, a lot of those aspects are obsolete, because you can't prevent somebody from proving their vote. I mean, in other words, still a lot of election gurus will say you can't allow people to prove their vote, but you can't prevent that, especially today with for example, smartphones. You could, if you got an absentee ballot, you could fill it out and make a little video of your finished ballot, and you putting it in your mailbox and proving to someone how you voted,
right,
or proving to yourself. And so we have to get past that. And one of the things that we'll get to is that we have a bill for California, and what a lot of people don't know is that coercion, vote buying, vote selling, in the past has been a misdemeanor. In other words, there's been practically no penalty when people have been caught, like an employer that says, you have to vote a certain way because our company depends on you on measure C passing or failing or whatever.
Right.
But they that's now in our, it's become tightened up in California quite a bit. And in our bill that our ballot measure, it would be a felony. And so a lot of these that used to be easy to get by with, especially with smartphones today, the kind of cheating that has happened in the past, it just can't happen. Is much less likely to happen.
Wow.
So that's one of the things that we're working on, is getting smartphone voting is part of our ballot measure, and we want to do demos of our system. And in fact, if you go on electionact2020.org, you'll see that Andrea Ross put a video of our proposed smartphone voting system, and it's very, very good. You can get an idea how it works. We do need to build that and do a demonstration of it so people can get comfortable with it. I don't think we can get the bill passed in 2020 without people seeing that working. So that's
Right.
another important thing that we
So that's electionact2020.org right here, and people can go there and see the demo. You also had...
You'll see the video.
Okay. And people can donate, of course, to your operation there, I presume using PayPal or something like that.
Yes.
This all seems like very sensible stuff that you're talking about. I can understand why people might not want it, but at the same time, voting from the smartphone, particularly if it was secure, I mean, you know, it seems like so many critical documents are handled over the phone with SSL or whatever it might be. I'm not, okay, here we go. Here's the video so people can check out how this works. But that seems like it would encourage more people to vote. I feel like you must be really onto something, and the POS people, as you would say, the protectors of the system, or the pieces of something, who would want to stop this, don't want more people to vote, because I think probably more people have smartphones than people who vote, generally speaking. Of course, we've got people who can't easily leave their homes if they're sick or disabled. This seems like a great idea all around. Brent, what can you tell us? Obviously, you guys are working together. What would you like to add to what Alan has shared so far?
Well, first of all, Jason, thanks for having us on the show and having the good thought to give your spotlight to this issue. This isn't an issue that comes easily for the general public. It takes a little bit of studying, and I can attest to that, as I'm a layperson, not a technologist. So I know, if I can understand it, that with a certain amount of attention to the subject matter, a layperson can understand that when the choices are in front of you, whether or not to utilize a secret software system that only the corporations know what's really going on, and you're faith-based at that point, to just accept the results as they're gifted, that if that's one choice, and the other choice is a less expensive, more secure system with more enfranchisement, you would naturally, for the sake of the national security, want to move toward the latter. Now, why we haven't is a very interesting subject that sometimes gets in the way of the solution conversation, but the fact is, what we've had happen is a lot of what you would call good governance groups were moths to the flame regarding the grant monies that were available within this arena, and the grant monies are all gone, and we're still using the crappy systems that we complained about in 2003. So somebody's got some explaining to do, and I think when the American public realizes that better systems are available, but they're being kept on the sidelines by corporate interests, to the detriment of the national security, there's going to be some real explaining to do amongst these alleged good governance groups that have taken all the grant monies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting that Alan was telling us that this all came about when he was observing the election shenanigans with George W. Bush versus Al Gore in 2000. I think people remember that, the hanging chads, all that nonsense. And then when I think about I mean, we're 2 years basically into this, Russia collusion illusion. We've so far seen zero evidence from Robert Mueller's investigation that anyone related to Donald Trump's campaign had anything to do with actually working with anyone from Russia to do anything relative to the election. We've heard about his lawyer paying porn stars. We've heard about guys who worked for him for a month doing financial crimes in 2004, but none of this seems to have affected the election. See, my concern is I feel like probably elections are, voting is being tampered with sort of always, and that's the reason why the people that have the power, as you've said, Alan, to put a system like this in place where we would all know what's going on, they don't want that because they have tried and true methods for rigging the system, gaming the system, and they don't really want to give that up. Now, you guys sent me this news release from Dean Logan's office from just about 2 weeks ago. This is an interesting development here. This is the Secretary of State. You've mentioned this. So what does this mean? Is California going to be adding your technology to their voting process?
Well, let me explain about Los Angeles. I mean, when we got started with open source voting, of course, LA was one of our targets to go talk to because they're the largest jurisdiction in the country. And we got some very good feedback from the Board of Supervisors there that they were very interested in our system and that we should talk to the elections people there. And in fact, in 2008, Brent accompanied me on a meeting with the board staff, and they introduced me to the CEO, the deputy CEO that was the supervisor of the election director, Dean Logan's supervisor. Her name was Ellen Sant at the time. And it sounded like we were in a good position. They liked what we had, and they liked the idea of open source. So what has transpired is that in 10 years' time, Dean Logan has sort of bastardized our idea. In other words, what he is now saying he has gotten certified an open source system, and it's an absolute lie. It is. He's lying.
Wow.
There is no open source, and if you ask them for the code or by any definition of the term open source, it's not open. So this is a problem, and I also sent you a email that I sent to Dean Logan in 2014. I sent it on Halloween Day on 2014. Dean Logan turned that around and said that was when I was threatening to sue Los Angeles, and that is absolutely false. What I said in the letter was that it was a friendly warning, and that after the way he was going, there could be a qui tam lawsuit against Los Angeles for throwing around a lot of money on junk. And I mean, he was that was in direct response to a sole source contract to a company called IDEO, and it was for like $15 million for some design work, just for some design work, $15 million. And we were livid about that, the non-competitive grant. He used the sole source justification, which was fake, and I objected to that. And in fact, the county actually gave me, took that and made a case out of it, but then they never did anything about it. They basically said, well, everybody does that, so has fake sole source justifications.
Wow.
And But at that time, I
Wait,
was
help us understand what that is. Sole source justification. So basically, the state needs to seek competitive bids unless there's some special condition, and this guy's making up fake reasons?
This is the county that made this contract.
Got
and
it.
the county has their own criteria. They say that you have to have special reasons for getting a sole source doing a sole source non-bid. In other words, he didn't put anything. He didn't put this
no-bid
out to
contract.
bid. He gave it to somebody.
Right.
And
Does he have any kind of business or familial connection to that somebody that he gave it to?
Well,
Yes.
He does.
That's very astute of you. Actually, there are some family relationships going on between some folks that make a knockoff brand of phony open source software, and the folks that did the design, that got the design grant. So that was funny that you just did your Kreskin impersonation and guessed that correctly, because in fact the former CEO of Lotus Industries, who worked for Mitch Kapoor, who funded the phony open source software, is also married to the head of the owner of IDO, who got the sole source contract. So there's a marriage literally going on between some of the software wise guys and the recipients of the sole source hardware contract in Los Angeles.
I have a feeling what you guys are doing threatens age-old mechanisms of rigging these elections, gaming these elections, and we're joking and laughing about it right now, but this is something that really hits at the heart of our democracy. This is true meddling with the election. Nobody has presented any evidence of this so-called Russian meddling, and I believe it's possible that Hillary Clinton and all of her constituents are so pissed off because they tried to rig the election and for whatever reason it failed. And I think you guys are meeting a lot of resistance because what you are prescribing would basically fill in the holes in this incredibly antiquated and easily gamed system. Is that the same feeling that you have?
Well put, Jason.
right. So not only would it be auditable and observable, but a lot less expensive, because right now, LA's put out a contract for, they're planning to spend many, I think, how much was it, Brent? It was like $300 million over a number of years.
Oh.
But it's a huge amount of money for equipment that they don't really need. I mean, if you use off-the-shelf components and let people use their own smartphone, there's no better voting machine than your smartphone. Your smartphone has everything built into it you could possibly need in a voting machine,
encryption and all that.
And it would be free. And people, for example, people worry about somebody using your smartphone to cast a ballot for you, but what we're proposing is that the application that you log into will authenticate you, because you have authentication you have whatever authentication method you have on your phone to prove that you have access to that app. And that's a much greater level of authentication than anybody going to a poll site. When you put your fingerprint or something like that on, and that you're able to run this application. So not only is it cheaper to do what we're saying, it's more secure. You're going to have absolute certainty, or I shouldn't say absolute certainty, but you're going to be as close as possible.
A much higher degree of security.
That the right person was the authenticated person cast a ballot, and that person can then verify that the vote was recorded and tabulated correctly. And we also, in our system, it works out that the vote privacy is maintained. The county would have no way to connect your specific ballot to you, but you're the only person on the planet that would know that that's your ballot. You would have an ID and a way to access it that you know is secure. So
this seems like an obvious slam dunk. Yeah, better and cheaper.
It's secure.
Right.
Very secure.
So this seems to me like an obvious slam dunk. I mean, we've sort of got it here. You've got an open source system, and people can vote on their phones, or they could go to a polling place where there'd be a computer they could log into, or must they vote on their phone? What about for people who don't have a smartphone?
No, in the measure that we have, and that you can read, electionact2020.org, it requires that each county offer smartphone voting. In other words, you can use it if you want or not.
Right.
But what we believe would happen is that a few people would try it. The percentage might be low to begin with, and but you can kind of predict who it would be. All of your younger people are going to prefer to vote on their smartphone.
Right.
And I think that over time that percentage would grow. I think that, but to begin with, no, they're not required to. But the counties would be required to offer it. Is the point.
Got it.
And the other thing the bill does is that it phases out proprietary systems, and it phases in open source. It says that by 2022, the Secretary of State could not certify anything but an open source system. So it puts open source voting into law. That's what it would do. And it would force counties to offer smartphone voting. That's basically what the measure would do.
Okay. So you've described for us a couple of opponents of this who, from the evidence, would seem to have conflicts of interest. They would prefer to give contracts for these sorts of things to their business associates, their family members, their in-laws, whatever it might be. Are there any arguments against what you guys are saying that are sort of like, oh, well, yeah, they have a point? Or is it all just people who want to waste money on more expensive systems that some company that funds their campaign controls?
Really, Jason, it's the latter. However, if you corner a supposed expert, like for instance, I spoke at great length with a fellow Ron Rivest earlier today, and I have good conversation with him from time to time. These types will stipulate that open source is an appropriate way to go, but they backseat it to their conversation about ballots. They'll talk about the need for paper ballots, which is not a bad idea. It's a good idea to utilize a ballot at the poll sites. It makes the public feel good, and Alan's done a lot of pioneering to protect the use of the ballot. They talk about audits, and they'll leave out the open source when it comes to crucial moments when they're on Capitol Hill. That's the issue. So even though they will give lip service to open source as a way to sort of soften the blow and do a chameleon, when it comes crunch time and they're talking about advocating for legislation on Capitol Hill, they'll mysteriously leave out the open source component, so that we're talking instead about paper ballots and audits as our goal for 2020, when our real goal for 2020 should be, number one, making sure there's no corporate software, Microsoft,
Right.
anywhere near an election system.
Right.
And then, of course, a ballot, and then an audit, of course, And then, of course, in there, Alan is now pioneering again, as pioneers do, to get this enfranchisement issue resolved, as well as some other security matters resolved by utilizing smartphone voting. We do separate it into, our initial work was to stabilize the poll sites, and now it's necessary to move forward with the smartphone technology, because the bad guys are using the method of running out the clock, and there's no time to waste. So whereas beforehand, many of us, including myself, were hesitant to start talking about smartphone voting because we hadn't stabilized the poll sites, now it's all hands on deck trying to get this ballot measure passed. And there are, just for the record, New Hampshire has moved toward Alan's work, and with a fellow by the name of Dr. Juan Gilbert, put in his system that he developed with some students at the University of Florida called the Prime 3. That's now in New Hampshire. It's not completed as a system. It still needs the tabulation piece, open source, but the voter interface and the disabilities components have been open sourced. And then San Francisco has allocated funds for a system that we're trying to really get certified as the state of the art in California. And at that point, we'll have a model for the rest of the United States, and it'll be a race to make sure that we're displacing as many secret software corporate systems as possible, and pushing these everybody to get involved toward the general public license open source systems.
Wow. Well, I would think that the city of San Francisco would probably oppose what our buddy Ron Rivest is doing when they see that he seems to propose Alex Jones as a candidate for president. So I don't know how they'll feel about that.
That's funny. Another thing that these wise guys do is they like to throw not only the other distraction points, but they'll also advocate for a lot of encryption. And Alan can speak to that, but the preference is naturally to have as much publicly viewable information as possible, and to avoid encryption or any other method that hides the ball from the public.
Well, for your information on that's not the whole story, but when you vote on your smartphone, your ballot would be like a PDF file that would be encrypted, and it would be carried by the messaging service provider to the county, but the county would have the key to decrypt it. So nobody would be able to see the ballot in transit, but you could verify it on both ends. The county can see it, and the voter can see it when it's at the county. So there is some encryption involved, but one thing I want to mention, that you had asked about how people might be opposed to it or not thrilled about it, and in all of this, it's the old story about follow the money, and a lot of this has to do with money, and even with the academics, their work is funded by corporations, and
right.
For them to be saying things that sound like they're against corporate interests is against their interests, and so they tend to soft pedal the value of open source, and not rock the boat of the corporate interests. So that's it's like a lot of things. Follow the money, and you'll get your answer there, right, about why this hasn't taken off, because the again, the potential savings, the country, in California, it's costing we spend about $10 per ballot. Well, and actually that may even be low. And the potential savings
$10 per ballot
per year, we could easily see where we could save half that.
Alan, why is it $10 per ballot?
Excuse me?
Why is it $10 per ballot?
That's a very good question, but you can watch a video of Dean. If you want proof, you can watch a video of Dean Logan talking to a supervisor a couple of years ago, and he talked about the cost of running elections in LA, and he said it was for a countywide election, it was up to $40 million.
That's crazy.
And they have to spend a lot of money to staff all those poll sites and all of that. But it's the cost savings. I mean, how much could you do? It's at least $100 million a year on average. I mean, because we have elections every year. We're spending, LA in one election, $40 million. Think about that. And then there's a primary as well as a general in this year.
And most people forget. I mean, if you had it on your phone that you could just do it while you were at work or having lunch or about to go to sleep, like that seems just better in every regard.
It's better, and the cost savings, as I say, I would say at a minimum, if our bill goes into play or it becomes law, at a minimum, we're saving $50 million a year. I couldn't imagine it being less than that. Wow. I mean, what can you do with $50 million a year?
I think quite a lot.
And not only that, but our systems in California, I mean, we're 13% of the country. It can be picked up and used anywhere. So if we can get this rolling nationwide, the potential is for hundreds of millions of dollars a year, billions over time, that can run into some serious money.
Jason, the last go round of federal funds, which was called the HAVA Act, Help America Vote Act, which we kid around and called it the Help American Vendors Act. That was $4.5 billion with a B that they spent in 2005, and the next one that they're trying to do will be twice that. So it's $8 billion going out the door to just a few vendors that have a complete lock-in on the market, and that's not even the big picture. The big picture is, like you said, the Republicans and the Democrats were fine with just meddling on the local levels and doing the dirty deeds, and that was copacetic. I don't think they anticipated outside interference, and it sounds like you're a guy that's not a Red Scare guy, but the fact is, when you have vulnerable systems, you just don't know where it's coming from or what's going on. So I think even the Dems and the Republicans are concerned now because the genie's out of the bottle, and they've got Microsoft breathing down their neck against open source, but they're recognizing, like the intelligence community, and one of my buddies, former CIA director Jim Woolsey, wrote some articles with us.
You're friends with Jim Woolsey?
You got to go open source.
You're friends with Jim Woolsey?
What's that?
You are friends with Jim Woolsey?
I like to think of myself a friend. I don't want him as an enemy because, he can show up anywhere at any time, and that's the end of you.
How do you know Jim Woolsey?
I know Jim Woolsey through this work of reaching out to DNI, DOD, DHS. These are the folks that we deal with to try to push on the federal level. And interestingly, Jim Woolsey has become an advocate for open source voting because he recognizes the alternative is Microsoft, and he's not a fan of corporate control over the voting systems.
Yeah, you can find, Jason, you can find a couple of New York Times editorials that Jim Woolsey wrote with our people. Brian Fox co-authored one of them, and Brent co-authored one. So he's put his name on it in public in a big way.
Right. I mean,
This makes strange bedfellows, doesn't it, Jason?
Well, I was going to say, this is your project, and you guys know a lot more about it than I do, but I don't know that a director of the CIA is somebody that you want getting involved with your project that's designed to make sure nobody is rigging elections. I think the CIA specializes in that, but everything else you guys have said I like a lot. I think the idea is solid. I think the notion of an open source system being utilized. I think a lot of people feel like it seems a little strange that in 2018, when everything is computerized, I mean, I'm sure the nuclear launch system doesn't rely on punch cards and filling out paper ballots. I think it's computerized, and I think that the voting system should be as well. And the things that you guys are saying make sense in general terms. Now, I think obviously just, sort of in any sort of field, playing devil's advocate, someone would say, well, maybe these guys are trying to make money. How can you set the minds of skeptics at ease that you guys aren't just being opportunistic and trying to make money from doing this?
Let me answer that so Alan doesn't have to. Alan Dechert, and so he doesn't have to speak about himself, has done himself damage as a patriot for this cause. Selflessly, he has pioneered this work, and he could be doing a lot of other things and making a good wage. Instead, he's sacrificed for his country and put himself in a difficult financial position, not to overspeak. And I myself have never touched a nickel from this. So anybody that wants to allege that there's some other game occurring here should look closer. That's why we're honest and transparent about everything. And even if someone was to make a nickel at some time in the future, who gives a shit? The idea is you get proper voting systems. The fact is, if I ever get any of my money back, I'll be happy. And if someone wants to take over for me, please do. So that's my feeling when somebody makes that attempt that, oh, well, somebody's in it for the money because you better walk a mile in these moccasins. This is horribly burdensome work, and we need help if we can get it from anywhere. And the bad guys take all the grant monies. So.
Right. I certainly didn't mean to imply that was happening.
No, we get the question.
It's the most obvious question. Right.
Yeah.
Well, also, I'll point out that in the bill, we never got funded. We never had any institutional support for open voting consortium whatsoever. CAVO has never gotten any institutional support whatsoever. So in the bill, this would, if we pass it, it would be different. There is a grant program that is part of this Elections Act 2020, and it would mean that the Secretary of State would fund 3 consortia to the tune of $10 million each, and they would build and get these systems finished and certified and tested, and then build a consortium to maintain them, because it's a different model. When you have free software, there's a different ecosystem to make it viable, and that's in the design. That's in the design of this bill. So, so people have to make money in order to make this work, and there's no money. If you look at the bill, there's no place for me in making money there.
Right.
But the I'll point out to you that I got started with open source software 20 years ago, and the model that I experienced, I liked very much. I made a Y2K fix-it kit. I was an expert in a desktop database called DBase, and my name was on the product. I worked on the product at Borland. I was a world-class expert in DBase. So when some of the Y2K problems became apparent, and that there wouldn't be another version of this old software, I was in a position as an expert to create a workaround for it, and I did that, and I put it out on the internet as open source, and I wasn't looking to make money on it particularly, and it was used by the Department of Defense. It was used by the governments all over the world. It was used by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and but it was used by everybody. But from auto repair shops had applications in DBase, and people would call me, and this is also how I got involved in elections in a sense too, because one of the calls came from an organization run by a fellow named Curtis Gans, who did a lot of work on elections, and he had an old DBase application, and he wondered if it might have a Y2K problem. And I said, well, I had a standard practice that I charged $500 to look at it, and then if there was work to do beyond that, I charged $100 an hour. This was 20 years ago, which is not bad. I wasn't getting rich on it, but it wasn't a bad thing to have going as part of my contract work.
Right.
And the first person that endorsed my idea for the new voting system was Curtis Gans, who was one of the. If you remember back 20 years ago at the election mess, he was one of the talking heads you would hear in Washington D.C. all the time. But he backed my idea for voting systems, and that kind of helped me get started. But that business model where you give away the software and then you make some money on the service and support. Right. That's the open source model. You don't sell the software, and in our model, you don't sell the hardware either. The hardware is what you get from, you buy a tablet from Dell
commodity hardware,
Lenovo or whatever, and you don't buy the software either. We give you the software, and then there's a support. There's support groups, companies that do the service and support around that. So, and it's not so different than what elections people do today, except that I mean, for example, Dominion, who has a lot of contracts in California for voting, they could still be in business. They just wouldn't be selling the hardware and software. They would be providing support. They would be setting up the poll sites, doing all that work. Because that can't be done for free either, and people have to make money on that. But that's I don't have anything to do with that.
Yeah, and I certainly didn't imply that you or anyone should not make money. Even if you're involved in the most magnanimous operation possible, we all basically need to earn money to have food and whatnot. So I totally understand where you're coming from. The website that I'm showing everyone right now is electionact2020.org. And is this the best place for people to go who want to help your project and contribute money?
Absolutely.
Okay. So if people go there, they click on the donate button, they're going to go to a PayPal site. And what is being done with the money that people donate here, just so our viewers know? Well,
I have three things that I need money for. One is, you know, I meant to tell you this earlier, but to finish that story, I did not threaten Los Angeles. I did not threaten Los Angeles 4 years ago. I warned them. I gave them a friendly warning. That was really what I meant, is that I wanted them to fly right, to do the right things. They did the wrong things. Dean Logan has appropriated the term open source, and he's not delivered open source, and so he's the warning that I gave back then is different now. I want to sue Los Angeles. I want to make a qui tam lawsuit against Los Angeles. And back there, I made the point in that 2014 memo that lawyers had told us that there's a qui tam lawsuit for somebody. But at that time in 2014, Dean Logan hadn't really done much. He hadn't spent a lot of money. So there's no a qui tam lawsuit is where you are somebody's a whistleblower lawsuit, so that but you can only recover money when somebody has spent money, and he hadn't spent a lot of money at that point, but he has now, and so.
And to be clear, if you win a qui tam lawsuit, you don't get the money, right? The person has to reimburse whoever they took the money inappropriately from.
There is a finder's fee for
Right.
for a qui tam
But it's
lawsuit.
mostly getting the money back to the taxpayers.
Right, absolutely, getting money back to the taxpayers. And Jim March, for example, had a qui tam lawsuit against Diebold back in 2003 or something like that. Bev Harris and Jim March,
Harris, of
it was
course.
a $2.8 million lawsuit. They ended up with, I think, $70,000 each. But I think this would probably be bigger than that. But
Right.
But right now, it's going to take thousands of dollars to get the lawsuit going.
Right.
And I plan to do that. So that's one thing. The second thing is I need money to do the demo of the smartphone voting application. Now, we did a demo in Linux World in 2008, which is on the internet. You can see it. You can say open source voting at Linux World or something like that. You'll find it. Brent was the MC for that. And I can tell you that was a 4-day conference, and it cost, my estimate was $30,000 for that. And we got a lot of in-kind donations and so forth. The conference gave us 900 square feet on that at the Moscone Center, and we were there for 4 days. I had 40 volunteers, and but still, that's a big project to put something like that together. And I think that something similar would be needed for a good demo of smartphone voting. We need to build the apps for the smartphones. We basically have all the architecture worked out, but still the apps have to be built, and then we have to do a lot of testing. We have to have there are a lot of components to put into place to make this demo work, and to also bring in the media. People have to, we did demos with TV cameras running going back to 2004. And those are big productions. It's a big project to put something like that together, but it helps people to see it and helps them to get comfortable with the idea. We need to do that with the smartphone, and I don't know if it's $30,000 or what exactly, but it's not a trivial thing, and
Right.
I can't get people to just do this critical work for us for free. I mean, we can get some of it done for free. But
No, but
so
you're
there's
running an
money there.
organization and it needs money. I understand.
And then the big piece is the ballot measure itself. We're going to need millions of dollars for that. In the near future, I need maybe $50,000, something like that. I'm going to have to hire a campaign manager. We have to have an attorney. We have to have lots of things in place. Now, one thing about the ballot measure, I got the measure written, and that's a big piece of it. If you had to hire somebody to write that measure, it would cost probably tens of thousands of dollars. And I got that done working with the California Legislative Council, and that's not a small thing, but that's done. It took too long to get it done for 2018, but we can just change it very little for 2020. So that piece of it is done, but still, we're going to have to raise a lot of money to get the signatures. Now we've worked with California Clean Money Campaign, and they've been very successful getting some bills passed. They've done sensational work. Trent Lang with California Clean Money, And they would get the signatures for us, but that's not going to be free. I mean, they're not going to do that for free. You don't get. It's going to take probably several 100,000 signatures, maybe 700,000 signatures, and you can figure at least $5 per signature, maybe more.
Wow.
So it's millions of dollars, but and I don't know if it can be funded by Crowdsource or we'll have to get some deep-pocketed person to help us. We've been looking for that for years. We haven't found it yet, but I think that it could be a combination. If we get rolling with some crowdsourced funding, more people hear about it, we could attract the interest of some people with some real money. They'll think that people could get behind it.
You know, someone comes to mind as you're speaking, Alan, who's interested in secure voting and who has a ton of money and influence. Have you presented this information to anyone who's connected to President Trump?
I haven't.
I have.
Okay. And?
Al, that's, again, more funny stuff. You know, I'm non-denominational, so what I do is I promote this stuff to anybody and everybody. And so, all the presidential candidates, every election cycle,
right.
we brief. And that was true the last election cycle and the one before it. I briefed Senator Obama and everybody else on that one, and then I briefed everyone on this one. So the presidential candidates, they're aware of this. A lot of very wealthy, powerful people have been briefed on it. I think the closer we get to civil unrest in the country, the more attention that gets paid to it. That's the unfortunate reality, is there's always some other issue that people want to deal with, and the fact that Alan has gotten this one this far without money is amazing. And sometimes these real rich guys, they only want to do something if they can splatter their own name all over it, which they really could at this point. They could take the credit for it and be the hero. So, if you know of somebody, let us know. And also I wanted to give a shameless plug to one more website, which is therealactivistmovie.com. So some filmmakers are making a movie about the dark side of all this, and that'll be an interesting documentary coming up that we think will also help sort of push the issue forward, and that talks about what we haven't spoken about so much today, which is how these groups that are against this work, that it's therealactivistmovie.com, and we're going to show, eventually the documentarians hope to show the back room of this stuff and just how come it hasn't moved forward quicker, although you might think of it as a bit of a failure that it hasn't. The fact that we've gotten this far is pretty good, with the lack of funds and the fact that it's just been a pretty small, poor team that we always need to expand outward.
Right.
So volunteers as well as money should contact Alan and as well, because there's lots to be done here.
Right. So people can help fund this documentary on Indiegogo. I wasn't finding that Real Activist Movie webpage, but we got to it here. I presume there's a link to the movie within the Indiegogo page, and of course people can fund it there. I do want to direct people's attention to, sorry, I lost your other website there. Well, okay. So that was what
The
is
other
it?
website is Election Security Act 2020.
Right.
And that's
Election.
the real place.
Election
I don't
Act
want to. I
2020.
don't want to take away. I don't want
Right.
to take away from that. But I did want to let you know there is a fun
Right.
documentary that's going to come up.
Right, and it's electionact2020.org. That's the place to go to donate, to support the project and help Alan and Brent get what seems by all measures to be an extremely sensible system into place. I want to thank my guests, Alan Dechert and Brent Turner. Gentlemen, is there anything else you want to say in closing?
Well, thank you very much, Jason. I think this is needs ongoing discussion and support. There's a lot. The very proof of the value of the work that we've done is that open source voting is now something that people are seeing as a good idea, and they want to put their name on it, even if it's even like in LA. Why is he calling it open source voting when he knows it's not? But he's calling it open source voting because it sounds good and people like the idea. It sounds transparent. He's being transparent, even if he's not. Yeah. And so we've accomplished a lot, and it's there's a we have a year to really get some support for this this ballot measure, and I hope we can do it.
Sounds like the only thing that's transparent is his opacity, but perhaps that is revealing something in and of itself. Brent, anything you'd like to leave us with before we wrap it up for this evening? Brent, do I still have you there? I think we've lost Brent's feed, but perhaps the timing is okay. He's told us about the Real Activist movie. Alan, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for joining us today. Once again, people should definitely be going to electionact2020.org. And yes, we did unfortunately lose Brent there, but that's all right. We can help these guys get what seems like an extremely good system into place. And Alan, I hope we will have you both back on pretty soon to hear how the progress is going. And it sounds like you're on to the future of voting.
I will add something that Brent might have said, if you don't mind.
Please.
His website is cavo-us.org, cavo-us.org. And there is a PSA there, a 3-minute video that people might find interesting. It's narrated by the great Peter Coyote, and that gives some information too.
It's Cavo US or it's Navo US?
Well, there's a Navo. I'm not sure if Navo has that one on it, but Cavo is the parent of Navo, and it's the Cavo is cavo-us.org, and that has a PSA.
Got it.
Yeah,
there it is.
Yeah, so that video right there, that the woman in the very beginning there, that's at our Linux World conference. So some of those pictures are actually from Linux World.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Alan, thank you very much for everything that you're doing. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a great weekend. I want to thank everybody for watching, and I'll see everybody soon.
Thank you, Jason.